possible objective was to see whether or not we could reproduce the pyramids in the terms of 1960.
The government has provided us with between $1.5 million and $2 million a year.
As far as I'm concerned, a cultural centre's not worth a bumper. It's not for the average working man at all. It's only for the snobs. And who wants to go there to see this place?
This is a pity because I go to your pub and I drink with you, and I don't feel that I'm kind of coming down to you, and I don't think you should feel that you're coming up to me. I think this is for everyone.
Now, this was a building to house works of art of the past, the present, and the future. It's an historical art gallery. It isn't a museum of modern art. It points to the future, and it belongs to the past.
Well, we really are in the entertainment business, you know. We're in show business, in fact.
Australia in the late 1960s. New ideas are flowing, new concepts taking shape. A young, vigorous nation not yet 200 years discovered and settled as a prison farm for unwanted felons. A country that a few generations have battled to thrust into civilized shape. From wasteland grew farms, ports became cities, until with basics laid, there now emerges a similar vigorous outpouring of efforts towards the arts and cultural interests, the mental recreations and purposes that are the fruits of established achievement. A nation now developing the music from its own creative soul. From the hard rock and metal of an untamed land slowly evolved the legends of pride and retrospect, the refinements and delicacies of taste and design, still the groping for a complete fulfillment, the questing for national destiny. A reaching out from deep inside the spirit of a nation towards man's utmost promise in the complete embodiment of body, mind, spirit, and soul. Here is the story of one such achievement. On Melbourne's great boulevard, the famed St Kilda Road, the new National Gallery of Victoria. It took 5.5 years to build. It cost $13 million. It was built to house what had grown to be the greatest assembly of artworks in Australia, a collection of international repute, conservatively valued at $26 million. Here, in a young, modern land, was built a gallery based on the freshest, highly ambitious concepts of design, a gallery projecting its art from an uncluttered, even luxurious base point of escalators, elevators which highlight in their modernity much that is inventive and unusual here, of bright infusions of natural lighting, of impressive patterns, novel ingenuity producing often the unexpected. Broad moats surround this ark, a great stone ship built to preserve not creatures' lives, but man's artistic output from the present to antiquities from as long ago as 30 centuries before Christ. Many hands and minds conceived and built this showplace. Gallery director Eric Westbrook and architect Roy Grounds were the two most responsible. Their joint aim?
What our aim is really in any museum, I think, is to take people, interest them so much that you take them out of the box of being just casual visitors, interest them enough to make them want to come back and become, even in a very minor way, scholars or, if not experts, at least interested people.
Once they get in, they'll get stimulated by the unexpected. They'll start to enjoy themselves, purely because they're seeing things they didn't expect.
And then when where the building leaves off, the works of art and the display of the works of art takes over, as it were.
Melbourne built its first national gallery more than 100 years ago, in 1861. The city, settled only 26 years, had amassed wealth from gold discoveries. From this wealth, the gallery grew through the generosity of its affluent citizens. By the start of the 20th century, it already ranked as Australia's biggest and most significant art point. But even then, it was beginning to become too small for its growing collection. By the 1940s, the gallery trustees firmed in their intention that a new building was essential.
Well, the old building in Swanston Street is now absolutely inadequate. It was opened in 1861, and even then, like the famous Topsy, it really only just growed, you know. It was never designed totally for its purposes. So that the halls are all of different shapes and sizes, they're all lit under different conditions. But most serious of all, of course, has been the fact that we have never been able to store the reserve material properly.
The war and more urgent post-war developments were used as excuses to delay action towards a new gallery until 1956, when the Victorian government acted and agreed to establish a building committee to carry out the long-delayed plans. To the gallery director Eric Westbrook went the initial task of setting out just what was needed. Now the way was open, and the problem was to combine concept with reality. With the cooperation of the gallery staff, he wrote a report on the requirements to be met. To fulfill these ambitions, another figure emerged, Melbourne architect Roy Grounds. His appointment was unusual, to the extent that it was made without the normal preliminary of a competition being held to consider different designs.
Well, the building committee, rightly or wrongly, decided in the end that they would have an architect, that they would not have the competition, but they would call for architects, the names of architects who were interested, and there was quite a wide response. Then it was a question of examining works that they had done recently, and in the end it was a very close go between who would be selected and who would just miss out. In the end, the building committee selected Mr. Roy Grounds, and without any doubt, they have never regretted the choice.
Well, I thought, well, this is rather a solemn task, a tough one. It's tough enough to tackle. I don't like easy tasks. This one was obviously going to be quite difficult.
The difficulty was historic. In present-day terms, the site was ideally close to the Melbourne main city area. But 8,000 years ago, the topography was quite different. Hobson's Bay, now at the mouth of the Yarra River, was a much broader expanse of water that extended several miles inland. The site of the gallery was part of the large bay. Then about 5,000 years ago, the sea began to recede. The Yarra and Maribyrnong rivers formed their courses. The areas around them were left filled with silt. It was the depth of this silt, an average of 100 feet in these suburbs, that presented a major task for the gallery architect and builders. Many centuries later, in the 1830s, Melbourne's first settlers saw a landscape of the area like this, painted by an artist of the day. The little village founded by John Batman in 1834 grew quickly, most of it on the north bank of the Yarra. When the first Prince's Bridge was built, linking north and south sides of the Yarra, the new gallery's site was still an empty paddock. Late last century came the beginning of the area as a showplace site. From early this century, it was the site for Australia's biggest circus. Here, for 2 generations of Melburnians, it was one of the city's favourite entertainment spots. Next door to the circus, the popular Trocadero dance hall. Then, in December 1953, fire destroyed the permanent buildings that housed the circus. To clear the site completely, the Trocadero dance hall also was demolished. The now emptied site was put to use as an open car park. With approval of the state government, the full site of 7.5 acres was finally destined to fulfill the gallery's ambitious plans. A vital new asset was about to grow in Melbourne. In September 1961, the Governor-General of Australia, Viscount de Lisle, visited the site and formally set in position the survey mark that officially established that work was about to begin on the project. The great starting day was the 7th of March 1962, when the earth was broken and the building process began. Before work could start above ground, the below ground foundations had to be laid, and to lay them came a giant pile driver. Its job to force down through the soft river silt concrete supports to rest on the bedrock deep below the ground surface. With brute force, this monster thrust into the earth more than 1,000 octagonal, pre-stressed concrete piles that ranged in length from 20 feet to 130 feet. Elsewhere in Melbourne, another and more glamorous historic occasion was taking place, a royal visit. As from Thailand came King Bhumipol and his beautiful queen Sirikit. Their visit was an indication of the growing links between Australia and Asia, links that were soon to be demonstrated in an important section of the new gallery that would be devoted to the exhibition of Oriental art. Early in 1963, the first phase of the building, the underground complex of piling, was completed. Now construction of the next phase could start. Within 2 years, the people of Melbourne were at last seeing the emergence of a building, and something useful. On the 14th of July 1965, the gallery's underground car park was completed and opened for business. Not only was it immediately an asset to the city, offering accommodation to 1,200 cars, but it was now helping to provide revenue for the rest of the project. Here was to be one of the world's first drive-in art galleries. February 1966. To the site came the Premier of Victoria, Sir Henry Bolte, for the official foundation stone laying ceremony. In this case, it was a foundation stone that was actually set in position 100 feet above the true bedrock foundations of this unusual building. But all important buildings must have foundation stones and foundation stone ceremonies, and this one was no exception. Australia's Prime Minister Sir Robert Menzies was also making other news at this time. After a record term in office, he retired and handed over reins of the nation's government to his deputy, the ill-fated Harold Holt. As Melbourne was acquiring an important new building, Australia was now led by a new Prime Minister. One of his first duties to welcome Mr. Hubert Humphrey, the United States Vice President. Now the new gallery building was rising, becoming an addition to the already impressive new Melbourne skyline. Shapes were starting to become recognizable. Over the concrete walls, skilled hands set in place the blue stone facing, almost 2 million cubic feet of stone veneer. Why so much of it?
This was a building on this site for these people in this land at this time. It would be quite absurd to think of this building in Brisbane or in Egypt or in London or any part of the United States or South America. It was a building designed for here and now, for the circumstances, the social conditions, the economic conditions, the geography, the climate. And the history of Melbourne is based on bluestone. The city is built on bluestone. Everything is bluestone below us. The original buildings were bluestone. So we used local materials because they're locally available and because they're very wonderful materials indeed. People have asked me about the bush-hammered concrete in the columns inside the gallery and in part outside the building. I'm full of admiration for the workmen that tooled those columns. They used big, brutal, vicious drills. It's called a bush hammering technique, and if you can imagine a very noisy dentist drill on your painful molar and imagine it 1,000 times the size, well, these men worked with those on that concrete for weeks at a time with pride of achievement, and they worked as artists, and they were artists.
When Roy Grounds' bush hammering artists had done their work, onto the scene came other artists, performers who used the uncompleted work site as a stage for an unusual television program. Greek-robed actors played out a tragedy. A new type of overseer took command, directing the work of the visitors. Television producer Murray Ashford had to don the unorthodox headwear of a safety helmet for this particular project. The regular workers became spectators. Dancer Antonio Rodriguez mimed the effort of a man erecting a great building. Pianist Freddie Phillips, dressed for the concert hall, emerged onto the unusual platform of a building site and played the grand piano in this bizarre setting. But harmony was soon followed by disharmony. And the point of issue was this: the Victorian state coat of arms that was specially sculpted to be placed above the St Kilda Road entry arch. The commission was given to distinguished Australian sculptress Norma Redpath. And this decision was hotly criticised by Melbourne art critic Patrick McKechnie. Roy Grounds confronted his critic on the site.
I'm not certain if the criticism is levelled at the building committee for having a coat of arms on its building, or for commissioning a distinguished artist to do a distinguished work of art, or if he's criticising the authorities for not commissioning Miss Redpath or any other sculptor for doing a major work. If the Age critic is that well informed about the intentions of the building committee, he's very much better informed than I am. I don't quite get the gist of the criticism.
Oh, but now, wait a moment. You see, I didn't level at any point any criticism at the building committee. I mean, I said we're not after scapegoats. But I mean, I think you would agree, Mr. Grounds, that it would be more desirable if the building had had a piece such as the fountain that Norma Redpath has just shipped to Australia, that's going to be going to Canberra, rather than just the coat of arms put onto your building. If you had the choice between a major piece of sculpture in which her central preoccupations as a sculptor were realized to the coat of arms appearing on your building, I'm sure you, with your distinguished tastes, would have chosen the piece of sculpture.
I did have a choice at the time. I still have the choice. I made the choice as a recommendation to the building committee. They grasped the opportunity, and so did Miss Redpath.
I mean, would she ever have sculpted the coat of arms if she hadn't had to do it for this building? Never!
After sweating it out, and I can assure you that any artist, even a practical one like myself, goes through a lot of blood and sweat and tears. Nothing comes easily. I reached the conclusion that if we could get a distinguished work of art in itself out of this symbol, it would be worth the try.
And you think this is what we have?
I am convinced that we will have just that, but I won't say the building will be better for it. I expect it will be better for it. But if it isn't better for it, the distinguished coat of arms will be taken away and will be put as a work of art in an appropriate repository.
But as a controversy, this, at the time anyway, was never a startling one. It stood out as a dispute in a building project that was amazingly free of controversy. Soon, more interest centered on the contents of the building. The open courtyards, for instance.
Perhaps I could demonstrate on this model and explain something about the courtyards. It's the simplest way to do it, really. You see here, there are 3 courtyards. Now, they're all different. One of them is a bamboo garden. That is in the center of the area where the Oriental collection will be displayed. The central courtyard opposite the arched entrance is a sculpture courtyard. And the northern courtyard is what I call the Australian courtyard, and what some people have mentioned as being very similar to an old Elizabethan playhouse. It was not intended to be that. You know, when an architect is at work, he's a little bit like a sculptor, working with materials. And the materials start to tell you what to do. Things develop around him. And as it gets going, the building starts to take over. I didn't set out to build a courtyard like that. It growed up around me.
And there, for the first time in Australia, I think, you'll be able to see fine sculpture in the open air, where, of course, it really should be seen.
And then you get the serene, relaxed, intimate bamboo garden. A place to sit and think about anything you like in peace and quiet with the tumbling noise and delight of fountains. It's to relax and ponder and be quiet.
Well, the third courtyard will be the busiest one of the lot. This will be for open-air music, open-air drama, children's entertainments, flower shows, even movies. And this will be in constant use. This is, in fact, also an extension of the exhibition area, so that the 2 areas can flow together and provide about 20,000 square feet of exhibition space.
A problem in galleries is lighting. Different objects of art need different lighting. Daylight can be fine in some cases, but not all. Gainsborough said he painted his works to be seen by candlelight. For this gallery, the problems were tackled in a way different from any ever tried before. The secret was in expanded aluminium grids, which were inserted between layers of curved, laminated thermoplastics, these becoming huge light diffusers that were incorporated into the roof structure. This allowed a high degree of natural light, but short of the full glare of outside light, to penetrate the exhibition areas.
Here we see the top lighting. You may notice as you walk past the building that this window, which is of the Polaroid type of glass, zigzags. This was a very deliberate technical analysis to stop us getting the effect of a vast plane of glass with its aberrations, its lack of interest, and consequently it forms a very pleasant aesthetic result to a technical problem.
Inside the building, baffle ceilings were used as part of the artificial lighting design. These provide a decorative effect as well as preventing the ceilings appearing too static. They also meant that the ceilings were movable, their planes changeable at any time.
Well, the real breakthrough in gallery design, I think, has been the installation of what we call study storage. You know, one of the most maddening things when you go to a public art gallery is not to be able to see the thing you've gone for, and you're told that it's put away or will only be available next month. We become, in fact, the first art gallery in the world in which every object can be seen almost immediately on request. We solve the problem by having a floor above each of the display floors, so that if you're in the gallery and you can't see in the display floor the very things that you want to see or know should be there, all you have to do is to ask the attendant on duty, and he will direct you up the escalator, and there a young man, I hope a pleasant and helpful young man or young woman, will be waiting to direct you to the object that you want to see.
But in a gallery of many unusual delights, an outstanding highlight is not any of the art exhibits, but a room, the reception hall, designed as a place for formal functions, receptions, and banquets. This room is a work of art itself, a showplace within a showplace, the most spectacular assembly hall in all Australia, with its great glass and steel ceiling. This crowning asset is composed of 7,000 individual pieces of brilliant stained glass, and no two of them identical in size, shape, or color combination, a vivid, unique art complex. Here is a place of special pleasure and emotional uplift for gallery visitors. It was designed by prominent Australian artist Leonard French.
We probably, with the architect, we began with an idea of light that may have filtered down through trees. And then later this became, to me, like almost like a Persian carpet, hanging in the sky, to be brilliant in the daylight, and in the evening dark and sonorous, and to have something rich and heraldic about it.
A national tragedy struck Australia on the day before the completed gallery was handed over to the building committee. Harold Holt, who had become Australia's Prime Minister just as work on the exhibition areas was starting, was drowned in the surf at Portsea. The eyes of the world focused that week on a memorial service for the dead Prime Minister at Melbourne's St Paul's Cathedral. From countries around the world, national leaders came to Melbourne to mourn. A new Prime Minister, John Gorton, the third to hold office during the years the gallery was being built and readied, took over the nation's leadership. In the months that followed, final preparations were made for the gallery's formal opening. What had now grown was a complex to rival a miniature city in its requirements. In February 1968, work began, moving the entire contents of the former gallery to the new building. The wrapping began the previous year, and this task alone took 7 months. The actual moving operation took another 9 weeks. Every item in the gallery had to be carefully wrapped and tabulated. The moving operation was done entirely at night when there was less traffic on the mile of roadway between the old gallery in Swanston Street and the new one in St Kilda Road. Not only were there likely to be fewer traffic interruptions and hazards for the huge haulage trucks, the night hours also meant that general security over the move was easier to control at the old building, along the route, and at the new building. The move was carried out starting at 3 o'clock each morning under constant police guard. As each truck was loaded, phone contact was made from the dispatch point in the old building to the new building to let the registrar in charge of the operation know that another load was on its way. Preceded by its police escort, each truck moved slowly the length of Swanston Street. Here, a major factor was to avoid vibration affecting the valuable contents carried in the trucks. The flaking and chipping of paint and frames, damage that could be done by a rough passage to statuary, fine chinaware, antique furniture. This was a fragile and precious cargo. There were no hitches, no losses, no damage to any of the valuable cargo that was the most expensive ever shifted at any time in Melbourne's history. Now, the storing, the arranging, the unpacking, the unwrapping, all the previous operation, only done in reverse. Here, at last, was the completed gallery, and here in it, the multi-million dollars worth of exhibits. Here was accomplished at last something that had been more than 25 years in its ambition and planning stages. Here, completed at last, was a center of arts to rival in its concept and in its content many of the most renowned throughout the world. The gallery is finished and ready to receive its public visitors. Its creators wait for the major question to be answered. In the eyes of others, will it be seen as the great achievement they set out to build? That final judgment, of course, rests with the people for whom, after all, it was made.